Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. For those of us out there who have pets, we know the deep bond that we share and the connection that we have. And certainly we feel that sense of an emptiness once we lose our pet. But during the time we have the relationship, we certainly would like to know, well, what is it they're saying to us? How do they communicate to us? And what kind of a bond can we have that could go even deeper than the one we have at just simply feeding and petting it? Well, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a professional animal communicator and a Healing Touch for Animals practitioner. The mission she has is fostering the sacredness of the animal-human bond and honoring, supporting, and healing the animals we love and share our lives with. It's from this deep calling that our guest spent more than 14 years with indigenous teachers, formerly studying earth guardianship, earth medicine, and animal knowledge. She uses ancient and modern forms of earth medicine to help animals with wellness, behavior, transitions, and the end of life. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Lessa Alexander. Lessa, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Well, it's great to be here. Yeah.
Pretty exciting, isn't it, talking about animals to people and how we can actually connect and communicate with them?
It is. It's an interesting calling as well. And I didn't necessarily start out doing this, and I've been doing this for about 4 years now, even though I had been doing it my whole life, but I've been doing it 4 years professionally. I'd love to share with you the wonderful story of how I got into this.
Please do. It's pretty exciting. I mean, everybody's always all ears when it comes to animals and communicating, isn't it?
Certainly. Well, years ago, when I got my first dog, I was really young, and I was, traveling and doing things and left for 3 months. I left the dog with friends, and I had done that on a number of occasions, gone for short trips and left the dog. Well, when I came back, the dog had run away. And that was a real turning point for me. And I thought to myself, I was kind of negligent, irresponsible, and self-absorbed, and I don't think I'm going to have an animal until I can really take care of them. So many years later, I met this cat, and it was love at first sight. And I bet animal lovers have had that experience. You don't get that with every single animal, but this was just this amazing connection. I asked the people who had her, they had 10 other cats, if I could take her home. They said, sure. Talked to her about what her life would be like. She agreed, took her home, didn't utter a peep on the 8-hour drive home, and we had 20, she was 1 when I got her, 20 years together. Didn't think anything of this whole, this talking and communicating piece. And then then when I got my dog, it was also a soulmate dog, this particular one, we negotiated certain arrangements and lived, together for 11 years. And again, we talked. I was doing shamanic studies at that time and didn't think anything of it until about 2 years after he died. I was sitting one morning and meditating, and he came to me, which wasn't altogether unusual. We periodically would connect that way. And he said, you need to do animal communication. And I thought, animal communication? I don't do animal communication. And he said, oh, yes. And he actually gave me a list of ways that I could help people and other animals. And I thought, I don't know. So I invested a little bit more in some education and training, and I had started my Healing Touch for Animals training at that time. And once I investigated, I thought, oh my goodness, I certainly have been doing this, and started doing it professionally, and it's just opened up from there. And it's just been a very amazing experience.
Well, I can imagine it would be. It also would probably, in a lot of ways, change what your former perception about animals might have been, especially when it comes to the realm of having pets. We tend to, as much as people really love and feel absorbed by the love and the care of their pets, sometimes think of them at times as that other thing that's in our lives, so to speak, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And that was part of it, is that I hadn't thought of animals in that way. And that's part of why I was called to this, is because I have always felt that they're really individual beings in and of themselves with a life path and life purpose, and deserve to be thought of in that way. So, yeah, but what I did, some of the things that I have discovered even is that as much as they may be these sovereign individuals, that their needs, really the way they meet their needs, are different than the way we meet our needs, although the needs may be the same. And their perceptions about things are very, very different. And they certainly have rich lives of their own. And I think of cats. I mean, I know that when we're not there, they're doing something, for sure. And then one thing I discovered with my own animals was that when I make a promise, and this is with this particular dog, that he let me know when I wasn't keeping my end of the agreement that we made. And in a particular situation, he was letting me know, and he was another time, second time, third time, I was, again, as we do in life, we get very involved with what we're doing. And I came home one day, and he had, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, he had chewed up my couch. And I looked at him, and I was like, what? And we had this eye contact. And Daniel, at that moment, I thought to myself, oh, my goodness, he has been trying to tell me, and I thought I could just see all those points where he was trying to let me know, you're not holding your end of the deal. I'm doing my part here, but you're not giving me what you promised. And he was simply letting me know that he had to take heavier measures to communicate with me that I wasn't holding my end of the deal. And I don't believe that animals are vengeful or consciously say, oh, I'm going to disobey you, because, to get back at you. I think that they are either very aroused and stimulated and cannot absolutely hear, if you're asking them, giving a command to a dog, they cannot perceive or hear you, or they're so involved in whatever, and they need to learn how to calm down and be able to receive the messages, or they are triggered for whatever reasons and are in survival mode. And as we know, for humans as well as animals, when we're in survival mode, that trumps everything. So it's really about understanding that they are not deliberately disobeying or not wanting to cooperate, that they're just simply they're living in the way that they know how to live and surviving. So it's about getting behind what's triggering them, unraveling that some, giving them making sure their needs are being met. And I really believe also very much that it's important to learn to calm and soothe your animals. Mm-hmm. And of course, that starts with calming and soothing yourself. And I always tell people that one of the things they can do with their animals is to actually develop a practice of calming for themselves. Animals are very, very sensitive to our emotions. And so I always think that one of the starting points in that process is to learn how to calm yourself, because the animal, it just amplifies. If we come home and we're stressed out, and the animal, is responding to us, they're going to get stressed out, and then they get stressed out, and then we get more stressed out, and it just amplifies. Whereas if we can just take a moment to do that calm place and greet them and do whatever, it really makes a difference. And the other piece that I like to share with people is about, there's the calming component, there's also talking to your animals. So I think that it's very important to let them know what's going on. So if you're agitated about something, you say, look, I'm agitated, and it's not about you. It's not unlike relationships with people where, I'm responsible for my feelings and my emotions, and I'm agitated, I'm owning it, and it's not about you, and I can still take care of you, not to worry, and I'm going to try to calm myself down. And if not, which also happens, I'm going to get support for that somewhere and make sure that I can be in my best self. And then, so that's one of the things that is very important, I think, is to talk to animals about what's going on for you, how you're feeling. Being authentic is really important. And I know that I was one day I was having some motion up for myself, and I was scheduled to do some healing touch for animals with some horses. So when I went in, I just said to the horse, look, I've got this stuff going on. It's sort of underlying, and I want you to know that I could still be calm, I could still do this work, and still be present for you. And it was one of the better sessions I had because I was genuine with the horse. And animals really appreciate that a lot.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about, as well, you look at the common way people tend to communicate with their pets, and it seems to be more of a projection, like they're talking to a human baby. And you kind of think to yourself, as hokey as it sounds, and I know we can get that way, as I know in our situation with my wife and I, we have Pug, and he's just overwhelmed with cuteness. I mean, there it is, and so you can't help yourself. But in seeing people that do that, and they talk in the baby voice and all that kind of a thing, what are pets commonly? How do they really respond to something like that? Do they like it, or do they think, would you knock it off?
I think it's really case by case. I feel like I say to people, keep talking to animals. They don't understand English, but they certainly understand emotions and imagery. And I feel like we don't have to use language to communicate with them, but because we're so language-based, that we have so much imagery, and I mean, visual imagery, but also audio and sentient sense, all the touch, all those different 5 senses that are actually, and the imagery that goes along with it is associated for us with language. So when we speak, that's what, and certainly emotion, that's what's coming through. So they don't understand the words, but they get the feelings. And I think that if you're baby talking to your dog because you just adore them, they're going to pick up on that, on the adoration, and nothing wrong with that. But if you're projecting and then having expectations of them that they're not capable of, that's a different question. So yeah, because people do have expectations of animals. They think, well, the animal can do this. Well, they don't have cognitive abilities the way we do, and they have a survival component of their being, and then they have, especially I think, animals that we live with and share our lives with. I think that there are no accidents about the animals that come into our lives or the ones that we choose. I feel for the most part, it's like any relationship, there's an agreement in place, and we've signed up to really heal and learn from each other. Mm-hmm. So, and that animal has their own spiritual journey, I'll call it that, and I feel that all animals, in a sense, have a spiritual journey. Wild animals may have a contract with the earth, and they do certain jobs, and then, animals that we live with, that we've actually bred to be our companions and helpers, their contracts are with us in many ways to help us, and we help them. And so that are called like the higher self of the animal, but they also have their whole survival mechanism, and they're not capable of making a choice and following it through. And I think of for myself, that's one of my practices, is to be able to come to a choice point. But there are times when I'm triggered into something, and I'm really struggling to make that choice at that point, and I have those cognitive abilities. And people do sometimes expect their animals to be able to make behavior choices that they're just not capable of, or meet needs, relational needs, that, or be able to know things that they're just not capable of. And we can teach them a lot, but yeah. So it's really, it's really case by case. And the other thing I'll say, Daniel, is a lot of people, in a lot of relationships, people will, the animals will pick up on people's emotions, as I talked about, but they also might pick up on their illnesses, and again, the ultimate truth value of this, I'm not sure about, but I've certainly heard enough cases where somebody had lung cancer and their dog came down with lung cancer, died, and then the person survived and lived through it. Did the animal take it on? Perhaps. And if those kind of contracts exist, or people choose to use their animals as surrogates for unmet needs, which may or may not be really what's suitable for the animal, those are just like with people. People partner up and they make choices that aren't in my paradigm, but it's their choice. So there's definitely that, and I believe that we each have our journey here, and our emotions, our illnesses, whatever we encounter are for us we're responsible for that. That's for us to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily think that it's, in my system that, asking your animal to take that on for you is appropriate. And they may choose to do so, the animal, and, that's beyond my ability to intervene with. However, in my own life, I certainly would let my animals know in no uncertain terms that I do not want them to take on things
mm-hmm.
for me. Yeah.
Speaking of taking on things, especially emotions, I remember watching a program where they were talking about Ground Zero, and this was after 9/11, when people were actually trapped underneath the debris, and it would take sometimes up to a couple of days to even get to them. What they were doing is they were sending, it was about the pug breed, as I just mentioned earlier, about our own dog, and they were actually sending them down into these areas that the people were trapped, and they said the reason was these particular breed of dogs tend to be able to have a tremendous capacity for empathy to take on a person's emotion. So here this wonderful dog would go scurrying down into the hole, find the person that was trapped, and just stay with them until they were actually able to get the person out of the area there. And they said almost all the time the person wouldn't let go of the dog once they were in the ambulance because of having that sort of connection down there. What are your thoughts about, animals? It seems to me like it kind of goes one way or the other there about having an animal take on something like that.
And then the question is, how much of it are they actually taking on? And my understanding for some of those animals that helped in that way, that they then had huge breaks. That they actually, scheduled in more breaks for the animals than the people. I don't know if that's true, but to that I remember hearing about that they absolutely allowed those animals a big break so they could recoup. And again, I think that's an individual choice. I think animals do sign up for things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the amazing thing about them, particularly dogs in this case. Yeah, they really do. And again, in my personal relationship, I don't do that, but I do think that it happens. And then again, those are working dogs, and I think that they are trained that way, and they don't, unless they pass all the tests, they don't make it. And I would assume that they are agreeing. The dogs are agreeing to do this job. Otherwise, they wouldn't pass the test.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you worked with animals in the wild?
Some. It's a very different kind of an experience. One of the things in my work with animals, when I teach animal communication, one of the first things is, first off, to have some kind of calming, being present, connecting with a universal energy kind of a practice. And the second piece is to always approach, and this isn't even animals, I believe all the kingdoms in nature, approach with a request. May I exchange with you and to share here who I am. This is my intention. May I share with you? I have yet to have an animal companion for a person that I've worked with say no, but I have had animals in the wild say no. Their contract is not with us. It's with Mother Earth, with nature. And so they're not always as open to connecting in that way. The ones that have been very open, wild animals, have been wild animals in captivity. I think that in some ways they're like advocates for in between the wild and the civilizer, for lack of a better word, between us and the wild animals, and they are open to it. And but they're with them, I haven't done the same kind of process because I'm not dealing with an animal that has some issue that a person needs some support around, health issue or behavioral issue. I'm simply connecting with them just to connect with them, and so that there's more of a communion that happens. And I realized I was working with some of the big felines in a captive situation, and they did share what they needed sometimes. And again, they are accustomed to being around people, so they're more able to communicate and express needs because they're dependent on people for those needs.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious because we're thinking about wild animals and then, of course, wild animals in captivity. Have you ever communicated with animals in zoos?
I have.
Now, what was that like? I would imagine they're not really excited about that. It's just me, but I wonder, what are your insights about animals who are in captivity like that?
Well, I think it's really hard on them, clearly. And I'll give an example. What I used to do some years ago, I had a particular zoo I lived near. This was in Denver. And I would periodically visit certain animals, and I would just connect with them. And I would send them images of their native land and a sense of freedom, that you may not be able to do it in body, but that actually I'm going to jump a little, but I worked with a cougar in our area at Wild Fields, and she was the only. There were only 2 animals there that were born in the wild. The rest were all born in captivity. And when I worked with her, she asked me to help her to make a bridge to the non-physical planes where she could go back to her place, in her dream time and visit there. And that because she was here with people, usually she wouldn't need that. I don't know. She needed that kind of jump start, that little opening to help with that. And so that's what, years ago, what I found myself just intuitively doing with these animals is opening up like an opening for them to be able to go in their dream time to their home and to have freedom on a spirit level, if not on a physical level, because they're not designed for those small enclosures, and some animals are not designed. They need a lot of private time, just because of the way they're wired. That's what they do. They spend a lot. The felines, they do a lot of solo time, and they're not around others, and they do whatever they do. And so here they are, and they really don't have much of an option. I think the zoos are doing a lot better these days, where they give animals, the option to not be seen, and they have a little more space. But this was a time when they really had no option. So I think that's really tough on them. Mm-hmm. But I think that when we, and again, the question is, may I approach? May I connect with you? And if they say no, then don't push it. It's really like moment by moment, case by case.
Now, when they answer you, what specifically is it? Is it a nod, a blink, a wave of the hand? How does that work there?
It's not physical necessarily as much as energetic.
Okay.
It's like an affirmative.
So you can actually feel a yes or a no coming off the animal, in other words. Okay.
Right, and sometimes it's simply they open up their energy field to you and they let you into it. So I would call that a yes. Yeah.
I know it's interesting as you were talking about communicating with animals earlier and saying that, well, they really don't tend to understand language so much. And I was watching an episode, I think it was like The Dog Whisperer or something like that, and it's a Hispanic guy that goes around helping people who have problems with pets. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. And it was funny what he said. It's kind of one of those things you catch at the right moment. He says, it's really funny in America that people talk as much as they do to their animals. He says, we don't do that down in Mexico. We just wave the hand if we want the dog to go get something or whatever the case is. We say very little, and they understand all of this. So you wonder, why do we talk so much to animals? Is it really to soothe ourselves? What is it going on there?
Well, I think it's because they are very much family members. I'm sure in Mexico people have companion animals, but I also know that there are many animals in Mexico, lots of dogs who are guard dogs, but they're not necessarily family members. And once we bring our animals into our homes as family members, then we do tend to talk to them as such. And again, you absolutely do not need the words. It's more that I think it's just easier for us to express ourselves with language, but you can just send them the thoughts and the feelings, and they'll still get it. And one of the things I tell people, in addition to talking about how you feel, is let them know what you're doing. And so that, I'm going to work for this such and such a reason. And I always tell people, if you go away, let them know you're going, and actually connect with them while you're gone. It makes a huge difference, And so we're not really talking, we're doing it through our minds or our hearts, as the case may be. We're connecting with them and just letting them know. And when they know what you're doing and why you're doing it and that it actually enhances you as a person, and they just really love that. They feel like they belong in the circle of your life and that they see how what you're doing supports you and then ultimately supports them. Mm-hmm. So I have found that animals really like to know what's going on and how that's helping you.
It's interesting you say that because there are times we'll leave and we leave our dog behind, and of course my wife communicates with the dog to let him know he's not going. And I think there's sometimes even before she does that he really has an idea that he isn't, so he'll go into the office and lay down on his bed in there. He just knows that's pretty much the beginning of the end right there. And then the times he knows he's going, you see him just right on her heels, just waiting to be harnessed. So it's pretty fascinating how they sort of know a lot of that without you really communicating it to them.
It is really amazing how they do know. Mm-hmm. And there's been research done on it, how using all different kinds of situations where the animals start to behave in a certain way that indicates they know you're coming home. And they did experiments with, using different modes of transportation, different times of day, and they had video cameras in the homes, and that the animals knew. They just knew. Yeah, mm-hmm. It is really amazing. And again, you could think of it as like a big knowing field that exists, and everything is in that field. And so that all that information exists. It's just a matter of tapping into it.
Mm-hmm. So with the time that we have left, what kind of tips can you give our listeners on how to talk with their animals?
So basically, I did start talking a little bit about that. First, to be really authentic, to just use language or send imagery as to what is going on for you emotionally, where you're at. Secondly, is to let them know what you're doing, keep them posted as to what you're up to and why you're doing it. And really, like if you're going to work out, you can just say, hey, I'm going to work out, and you could just send them that feeling of how great it feels, and then how when you come back, you're going to just be much more relaxed. And they just love that. They love knowing that. And then the other thing about talking to your animals is a way to really get confirmation whether they're actually hearing you. And that is to ask them to do something for you. And this isn't like a really huge thing that, has been problematic, but something very simple. Let's say I had somebody I was working with who had a sort of a aloof cat and really wanted some cozy time with the cat. And the only time the cat was cozy was when they got back from being out of town. The cat would sit on her lap for a little while, and then that was it. Well, I suggested that she just ask him that that's something she would really, really like. And sure enough, he started sitting on her lap. So something simple like that, you can ask an animal, and it really makes a difference. And, yeah.
Interesting. And how about if the animal feels stressed? What are some ways we can soothe them from feeling that way?
So usually animals feel stressed when there's a lot of change. It could be someone moving into the house, out of the house, illness, death, new job, all those different, it's usually something that's happening that's causing change. So the first thing, as I said earlier, is to really calm yourself, and that we are really the teachers for our animals. We're the parents, the teachers, the leaders. We need to show them. I was working with someone who was just wonderful with their dog. The dog was very hyper alert and defensive, and they were, the walks and the playtime, the animal behavior, everything. They were doing all these different things. And when I worked with the dog said, I really need my people to sit down with me, be grounded and calm, so that I know what that feels like, because that I can't figure it out myself. And and
nothing like being with crazy people in the house and the dog trying to settle down, or the cat or the bird, whatever the case may be.
Exactly. It's really about teaching them how to be calm. So that's really, really critical. The second part is stabilizing the environment. If that's part of, there's some change in the environment, that is really important. And again, I had a situation where someone had taken in a feral cat. They were socializing the cat. The cat was starting to come in. They were feeding it, leaving it food. Well, then they had some house repairs that came up, and the cat flipped and didn't show up. So what we did is we talked to the cat and said, look, these 2 times a day, we're going to have it be quiet, and you're going to have food available. So maybe 1 or 2 times they did that, the cat didn't show up, and finally the cat did get the message and started showing up, and it was calm and quiet, and none of that other stuff was going on, and they were able to continue, making progress with this cat, while at the same time still, finishing up their repairs. So that type of thing of stabilizing the environment is really important. And then the third thing is consistency and creating routines with animals. So it's really also about really assessing, okay, are they getting enough stimulation? Are they getting enough exercise? Are they getting the quiet time? And then being realistic about what can I offer this animal? How much can I really commit to that I know I could come through on a regular basis? And then making those commitments and following through. And when animals can count on that, it actually helps them really calm down, just in general, because they know, okay, I'm going to get my walk. Okay, I'm going to get my quiet time with my person. Oh, I'm going to get to play, or whatever it is. I'm going to get my treat food, and then they really feel much safer, and they're able to trust better. And then if there are some behavior issues, then you can start working on those behavior issues once there's some of that trust and that consistency built. And it's again, this is not that different from dealing with children or with partners. I mean, it really helps to have clear communication about what's going on, letting them know this isn't about you, and that I can take care of you, and here I'm showing you how I can take care of you. I'm calming myself. I'm showing you how to be calm. I'm creating these consistent routines for you. I'm letting you know what's going on, and those simple things really help deepen the relationship, because the animal feels really seen and heard, and it also helps to unstress the animal. And then if there are other issues, then we can look at those and take it a little bit further.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is something you can actually teach people. Do you have courses or trainings where you help people with this?
I do.
Okay.
I basically have I offer little programs where I work with both working with the animal. If the animal has some behavior issues, we work with the animal and we work with the person, so that we're working from both ends to help resolve some of what's going on. And I do also, periodically have workshops around the communication piece.
Now, Lessa, for our listeners out there, is there a website they can find out more about you and maybe how to connect and perhaps take these workshops on animal communication?
Sure. My website is www.wholeself-whole-earth. And I would also offer folks who are listening today, I would offer a limited number of complimentary, what are called discovery sessions. That'd be 30 minutes over the phone, where we would look at the top challenges you're experiencing with your animal, and then see if there's a fit for us to work together. And if people are interested in that, if in 24 hours, just email me and just say talk with Lessa, Lessa, and my email is on my website.
Well, very good. Lessa, thank you for joining us here on the program today. Always an interesting subject when it comes to animals and humans and the relationships they have between each other.
Definitely, and it's a very, there are different levels of relationship. Some animals are companions, some work for us, some are wild animals that do all these other things. But I feel any relationship we have with animals enriches us, and it helps us it asks of us to be more in our own true nature, and connects us with nature and the earth in that way.
Certainly does do that. Thank you again for being on the program today.
My pleasure.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us today here on the Beyond 50 Radio program. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. The number 50 is what you type in there. Sign up for our free weekly e-news updates. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio, as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.